Hi, welcome back. In this last video dedicated to the life post-COVID, we talk about traveling. How traveling will be after COVID. First, I'll talk about airlines and the aviation industry. Secondly, I'll talk about the cruising industry. And last, the viability of it all. So stick around. And we start talking about aviation. Definitely one of the industries that I love because I'm an aviation lover. I've worked with the airline for 8 years and I truly enjoy working with airlines. My time with Air Timor, which is an airline in East Timor, was amazing. And I really enjoy working in a sector that I love so much, and being in contact with all of this is really good. However, 2020 has been a very devastating year for everyone and for aviation in particular, since border closures and COVID restrictions mean thousands of people losing their jobs in a split second, and lots of airlines going down and flights cancelled, planes grounded. It was a total carnage in this sector, and obviously for someone who really likes this sector, it has been devastated, and obviously for those who work in the sector. But aviation is an industry that is used to challenges. In fact, that's how they operate. Their existence is basically a challenge, because they're constantly trying to challenge themselves to get planes that are more efficient, that consume less, that can take more people, that can fly faster for the long haul flights, etc., etc. So basically, since the beginning of aviation, it's always been a challenge. They're always challenging themselves to become better, more profitable, more efficient, etc., etc. So I don't think it will be different with COVID or in the post-COVID world. I've said this many times, and I keep saying I don't think we're going to go back to the normal, to what we knew as normal. We will go back to a COVID normal. That's going to be our normal, I believe, because there will be things that will remain in place. I don't think we will eradicate the virus. I think we will have to learn to live with the virus, even if a vaccine actually happens, which everyone is very hopeful, and scientists say that it might happen next year. Even if a vaccine happens, I don't think it will be the end of COVID. We will have to learn how to protect ourselves from COVID, such as we do with many other illnesses. However, a vaccine will be very hopeful, and I hope it will come sooner rather than later. But as I said, aviation is an industry that it's always reinventing itself, and it's always challenging. And I think they will come up with solutions, because obviously there will be a limited capacity. I would say at first, but I think the future will be that capacity will be affected by COVID, because I don't think people will be able to fly the way that we were using, for example, in economy class, that you are just basically sitting next to someone else and everyone is very close together. I think we will have to abdicate of that. Airlines must think of a creative way of mitigating this issue, because I don't think that will be possible. However, if you limit capacity, you obviously limit profitability. And if you limit profitability for an airline, that means raising the prices of flights. And that won't be positive for them, won't be positive for us, won't be positive for anybody, because if they need to increase their prices to face the extremely high costs that they have, of running an aircraft, because it's a very expensive exercise, from fuel to food to the cabin crew to everyone involved. So if they have to increase the prices to face these costs, that means that a lot of people that are now able to fly, so a lot of tourists, won't be able to fly anymore. So they won't be doing it. And that means a loss of customers for them. Of course, there's always going to be the business sector that they will always have the need of flying. I don't think the business trips will end after COVID just because now we are using Skype and Zoom, etc. Of course, there will be a place for these platforms, and these platforms have been the biggest revolution that we had in this pandemic. However, I think there will always be the need for meetings face-to-face, and they will eventually happen once we go to a much more safer world where people are a little bit more safe to fly and to travel abroad. So I think it will be obviously a process of adapting to the new reality, and that it's been actually what aviation has been doing over the years. They get the reality and they adapt to new realities. They become more efficient. They become, and that's been the reality of this sector. So I think this is, on that perspective, this is not new for them. What I think is really challenging is the fact, for example, of the limitation and the restrictions within the cabin. Unlike people may think, and when you think of aircraft, you think, oh, people are really close together, that's very dangerous, this is not going to happen anytime soon. In fact, and in my article, I also quote another article that I read, that talks about these HEPA filters. Aircraft, they are equipped with HEPA filters, very specially designed HEPA filters that clean the air and replace the air in a matter of minutes, and make the air, they claim on the article that I read, make the air inside the cabin be as sterile as an operating theater. So it's pretty safe. And we remember in the times of smoking in planes that the air needed to be renewed very frequently, otherwise everyone would choke inside. I'm very glad they don't do that anymore, but it was a reality. But obviously, this is a safety that we obviously can see in aircraft, but most people may be quite skeptical about it. Alitalia, for example, and I believe this would be the big revolution, and this may be the solution perhaps for aviation going forward. And other airlines may be looking what Alitalia is doing and eventually implementing this type of system in other airlines. Alitalia announced, and I have the link on also in my article, that 2 of their 7 flights from Rome to Milan will be COVID-free flights. This means that the people, so the passengers in those flights, will have to do a COVID test, and they have to present at the gate a medical certificate that proves they have been tested and they have tested negative for COVID. And also at the gate they will have to do another test, antigen tests, so they also prove to the ground crew that they are COVID negative at the time of boarding. This will not only make flying a little bit more safer, or will give people the perception that flights are safer, but also it also give another layer of confidence to governments that eventually may allow more people in and relax a bit the restrictions on borders. I think this idea from Alitalia is really good. Of course, it will have some costs because obviously people being checked, the temperature checks, and even these instant tests, everything, it has costs. Of course, it does. But if we are going to look at having to raise prices, not having as many customers, and having a little bit more costs, but in the end making it profitable again and making it go, I think I'm not a CEO of any airline, but I think if I was, or if I had one here with me now, they would say, well, that's an idea, that's a good idea. So I think this will be a very good idea for the industry. Then we have the commercial flights and the international flights. I think the international flights will be the ones that will take longer to recover, and that because obviously there's all these border restrictions. And for example, in Australia, the government has already said that they won't be opening international borders at least until June next year, but they still didn't give us a certain date, and they still don't know if June next year would be the date that they would be opening the borders. It all depends on the developments. It all depends on how the pandemic will evolve and how the numbers around the world will be in at that time. So internationally is going to be a bit harder. For example, in Europe, there's some international flights allowed and there's some movement within the European countries. In Australia, no international flights whatsoever, except for those that are bringing Australian citizens in, because obviously there's some Australians stranded in foreign countries and they want to come back home. So this would be maybe an idea. For commercial flights, obviously commercial flights I believe will have room for recovery a little bit faster. For example, in Australia, we can't go on holidays overseas. If the borders within the country restrictions ease and borders are open, people might start going on holidays within the country. And we have a wonderful country. Everyone wants to come to Australia for holidays. And why do we go overseas? So it's another option for us. So it will be really a question of rebranding domestic flights and try to, instead of trying to cater for the international market, which obviously is not happening at the moment, maybe catering for the domestic market. And we see that happening already. We see Qantas doing that, and we see Virgin Australia that is, after a big struggle, has now continue and it won't go down, thank goodness. But we see the airlines trying to obviously ramp up their domestic market, because obviously the international one is completely stopped at the moment. So this is a way. So there's always a way, and I believe aviation will find a way. Another sector that has been highly impacted by COVID-19 within the tourism industry has been the cruises. A lot has been said, and once this pandemic hit, cruise ships were basically seen as breeding grounds for infection, and we had many problems with cruise ships basically stuck in the sea. No country wanted to receive them, and people were infected on board, and it was a serious issue. I also mentioned this on an article a few weeks ago. For example, in Sydney, we had the massive problem with the Ruby Princess cruise ship, where dozens of people have died, and it was a massive scandal, and it has proven to be a lesson for everyone involved, both governments and the cruise ship or the cruise line industry, which is malpractice. There has been thoughts that could have been malpractice within the cruises, and also a few mistakes also from the health department, namely the New South Wales Health Department. So there's lessons to be learned in both sides. I don't think it's time to point fingers. I don't really think we should be pointing fingers on a situation like this. I think we should really be learning from all the mistakes that have been made, and make provisions for these mistakes don't never happen again, should we be faced with another situation like this. Obviously, I think going forward, and we know it's historical, a ship, it has always been an issue with infection spreading, and we know that from history. We know from the time of the discoveries, the huge amount of sailors that have died with disease, because once one get it, if it's an infectious disease, chances are it's going to spread throughout the ship, and it's very hard to contain. Obviously, 5-6 centuries ago, the measures that could be put in place to mitigate this issue were very limited. Today we live in another world, and obviously we have other options that they didn't have. However, this fact is still present, and unfortunately we could see it once this pandemic was declared, and once COVID happened, that it still happens today. And if measures are not put in place, disease will spread in cruise ships just like it spread on those ships back then. So I believe the future of this industry, and I believe there will be a future for this industry. However, I don't think, and unlike what I said for aviation, that I think you will be sooner than with cruise ships, because of customer confidence after all these scandals, and especially here in Australia after the scandal that we had with the Ruby Princess. But I believe around the world would be exactly the same thing. People will think twice before booking a cruise, both because they think about safety issues, and because we are still not out of the woods, and they saw what happened. If numbers get high again, then they won't be accepted in any country, and they end up being stranded at sea in a illness infected cruise, and no one wants that as a holiday. So I think for the cruise industry it will take a bit longer, and a little bit more homework needs to be done. For example, I believe, and after the Royal Commission in Australia, and I believe there will be other sorts of investigations around the world with other cruise liners and other cruise ships that got stranded and were actually infected or had passengers infected with COVID. I believe this will, because as it's also historical, from every single situation or every single crisis, we learn from it and we get better. And I think this is what will happen to this industry as well. After all these mistakes and all these possible crises and things, that possible malpractices and things like that, I think there will be lessons learned and the industry will become better. We saw that, unfortunately, with another major disaster in a ship, which was the Titanic. After all those people dying because of lack of safe boats and life vests and everything, today we have every ship has enough lifeboats for all passengers and crew on board, and we have life vests and everything, and we don't care as much about the aesthetics of the ship, but we care about safety. So that was a lesson learned from an unfortunate and massive disaster. And I believe, obviously, in a different context, but I believe this will happen as well this time around. And there will be an increase in regulations. There will be training, because I think that's one of the things, and I mentioned that on my article, I think this is one of the things that is lacking, is that people should be trained on how to deal with infection control inside the ships. So they know exactly what to do, they know the guidelines, and there should be, obviously, and there will be increase of regulations. So these crews and these cruise ships are obliged by law to communicate with authorities exactly what happens within the ship, and if they don't do so, that there will be consequences. And I think this is needed to restore confidence in the sector and to restore normality, or some sort of normality. As I said, for aviation, I believe for the cruise liners, there would be also limited capacity. There won't be, for example, I'm thinking about those cabins where you have bunk beds and a lot of people sleeping in one cabin, like the second class, I believe it is. I think there will be changes, and that may not be possible. So there will be limitations there, and they obviously will have loss of demand at least for the very first 2-3 years. I think there will be a limitation because people won't feel confident in going on a cruise, because after what happened and after what they saw, they really don't trust it will be safe for them. However, I think it will eventually recover. It will be longer, in my view, it will be longer than aviation, but I believe eventually this industry will also recover. But there's, as I said, there is a little bit more to be done in order for this industry to be viable, in my view. There needs to be training, there needs to be adequate measures put in place, so if something like this hits, measures are put in place and disaster is averted, so it doesn't happen what we saw today. However, I think there is a future. Just like for aviation, I think there is a future for cruise liners. In the end, it all comes to viability, and both aviation and cruises will have to study all the factors here, all the aspects of this pandemic, what has happened, what may be the future, and come up with solutions in order to keep their businesses afloat and keep providing the great service they've been providing for years and years. I believe that will be possible. I don't think it will, the normality, even the COVID normality, won't happen for this sector, for the tourism sector, in the next 2 years. I think there will be a lot of disruption still, both created by limitations on the numbers inside both aircraft and ships, but also other factors like possible closures in borders still, the way the pandemic will develop, if we're gonna have perhaps, I don't know, I hope not, a third wave, or if the vaccine actually comes and numbers start decreasing and confidence start increasing. It all depends on what the future brings and how this pandemic will evolve, and that will obviously dictate the way that these companies will adapt to the new norm, adapt to the new future, and obviously try to thrive and to come up on a positive note after that. As I said, I don't think it will happen in the next 2-3 years, but it will eventually happen slowly, obviously. And as I said, I believe aviation will be able to recover faster than cruises, but in my view, both will recover eventually. It's all a matter of time, and it's all a matter of management and the measures that both sectors put in place in order to make it work. I think operators need to be creative, both airlines and cruise operators. They need to be creative. They need to create products that will maybe appeal to new customers or appeal to the new market, because obviously they will be fighting to a lot of factors here. They will be fighting less demand, they will be fighting less disposable income, because the world is in recession and people have less disposable income, and therefore they may be less prone to travel, of course, and therefore they would be hard for airlines and for cruises to sell their products. So they have to be creative, maybe create different packages that may appeal to people. I don't know, obviously, but I think they need to be creative, and I know that this is a sector where creativity is really important, and they usually are really creative, and I'm sure there will be more packaging, and there will be both sectors adapting to the new situation and trying to reinvent themselves in order to be able to operate in a COVID-safe world. Even when we come back to normal, the new normal, the COVID normal, there will still be a different environment. The world will be a different environment, and therefore the way that companies work, and this is not only for aviation and not only for the cruise operators, this is to all companies. The way that we operate and the way that we run our business is going to be different, because the environment is going to be different, because people will be doing business in a different way. People will market their business in a different way, and everything is going to be done in a different way. We already see this these days. We already see that, for example, for the majority of companies, ad campaigns in television or in newspapers or things like that, they don't really work anymore, because people don't really watch TV as much anymore. But for instance, in social media, it's been flourishing, and people, everyone is marketing their companies and their businesses on social media, because that's where everyone is, that's where everyone is looking. So obviously this is part of the new environment, and we all need to look at this new environment and knew how things are done, and how other businesses, how everyone is adapting to this new reality, and make it work for each sector. And I think the tourism sector won't be immune to this, and they will eventually adapt. Aviation will adapt. Aviation has obviously another type of demand that cruise ships don't. Aviation have the demand for migration, which eventually will start, for migration, for business traveling, and all those customers that obviously the cruise ships don't have. So it would be slightly easier for aviation to recover. However, it won't be easy either. In both cases, it will be a difficult recover. But I think, and with measures like Alitalia is doing, and other things like that, I believe the sector will eventually recover, and will eventually be traveling and going back to our overseas traveling and being happy, just like we were before COVID. And that's all for today. I hope you liked this video about my little analysis of what I believe the future will bring for the tourism industry, more specifically for aviation and the cruises. I will leave the link for my 2 articles, the one that I wrote about aviation and the one that I wrote for cruises, so you could also have a look at what I wrote then. And of course, if you have any question, if you would like to share any experience, or if you have an idea, if you work in an airline and you would like to share your ideas with us, why not? Leave me your comments. Let's make this conversation start. And of course, share with your friends, share so we make these conversations even bigger. And subscribe the channel and you get a notification of a new conversation every week. I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you very much for watching. See you next week. Bye.